Sometimes the cruelest chains are forged not by strangers, but by those who should love you most. England. 1818. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Redfield Manor, casting long shadows across floors that had once gleamed under the care of a full household staff. Now, only a few loyal servants remained, witnesses to a transformation so complete that visitors might never guess. The young woman scrubbing the entrance hall tiles had once been the daughter of an earl. Lady Philippa Wycliffe, 27 years of age, straightened slowly from her work, pressing one hand against the small of her back where the familiar ache had settled. Her dark chestnut hair, once arranged in elaborate styles befitting her station, was now pulled back in a simple knot beneath a plain cotton cap. The hands that had once held embroidery needles and dancing cards were rough from lye soap and cold water. "Philippa!" The sharp voice of Lady Constance echoed down from the upper floor. "Where is my breakfast tray? Must I perish from hunger while you dawdle?" "Coming directly, my lady," Philippa called back, rising to her feet and smoothing the coarse gray fabric of her servant's dress. 5 years had passed since her father's death. 5 years since Constance had maneuvered herself into control of Redfield Manor and everything within it. The tutela arrangement had been presented as temporary guardianship until Lavinia reached her majority or married, whichever came first. But Constance had proven remarkably adept at ensuring neither milestone brought freedom. Mrs. Dorothea Henley appeared at the kitchen doorway, her weathered face creased with concern as she observed Philippa gathering china onto a silver tray. At 60 years of age, the governess-turned-housekeeper had served the Wycliffe family since before Philippa's birth. She alone remembered the days when the late Earl had spoken proudly of his eldest daughter's accomplishments. "That woman grows more insufferable by the day," Mrs. Henley muttered, keeping her voice low. "Your father would weep to see you reduced to this." "What my father would feel matters little now," Philippa replied quietly, arranging toast and preserves with steady hands. "The law recognizes Constance's claim until circumstances change." "The law?" Mrs. Henley spat the word. "Mr. Fairchild and I both know something was amiss with that will. Your father spoke often of his intentions for you, and servitude was never among them." Philippa paused, meeting the older woman's eyes. Edmund Fairchild, the estate administrator, had indeed expressed doubts about the legitimacy of certain documents, but without proof. His concerns remained merely whispers in the corridors. Even if we had evidence, who would champion the cause of a penniless woman against the widow of an earl? "We must endure, Mrs. Henley. There is no alternative." She carried the tray upstairs, navigating the familiar path to what had once been her mother's chambers. Constance had claimed the finest rooms immediately upon marriage, displacing the then 15-year-old Philippa to smaller quarters. Now, even those modest rooms belonged to Eugenia, while Philippa slept in what had once been the governess's attic chamber. Constance lounged against silk pillows, her blonde hair arranged in papers, her face bearing the slight puffiness of someone who indulged too freely in wine the previous evening. At 42, she remained attractive in a hard, calculated way, her beauty maintained through expensive creams and the labor of others. "About time," she said without looking at Philippa. "The chocolate has gone cold, I suppose." "I brought it directly from the kitchen, my lady. It should still be warm." Constance waved a dismissive hand. "Set it down and open those curtains. Lavinia and Eugenia will be rising soon, and we have much to discuss." Her eyes, pale blue and sharp, finally focused on Philippa. "You may pour the chocolate, then remain. What I have to say concerns you as well." Philippa obeyed, pouring the steaming liquid into a delicate porcelain cup. Her half-sisters would be stirring in their rooms, anticipating another day of leisure and luxury, purchased by the degradation of their elder sibling. Lavinia, golden-haired and conscious of her beauty, rarely acknowledged Philippa's existence except to issue commands. Eugenia, the younger at 20, alternated between ignoring Philippa entirely and taking cruel pleasure in inventing additional tasks. "An invitation arrived yesterday," Constance announced, sipping her chocolate with evident satisfaction. "From the Duke of Greymont. He is hosting a ball to mark the opening of the season at his estate." Philippa's heart constricted slightly. She had known the Duke's family once, in the days when her father was alive and she moved freely in society. The prospect of seeing those grand rooms again, of witnessing the world she had lost, stirred emotions she generally kept suppressed. "How wonderful for Lavinia and Eugenia," Philippa said carefully. "I am certain they will make a favorable impression." "Oh, they will indeed," Constance agreed, her smile widening in a way that sent warning signals through Philippa's mind. "And you, my dear stepdaughter, will ensure their success." "I do not understand, my lady." Constance set down her cup with a decisive clink. "You will accompany us to the ball. Not as a guest, naturally. That would be inappropriate for someone in your position. No, you will attend as what you have become. A servant. You will wear a maid's uniform and serve refreshments to the assembled company." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Philippa felt the blood drain from her face. "My lady, surely you cannot mean to expose me to such humiliation. Many of those guests will remember when you were what?" Constance interrupted coldly. "The daughter of an earl. That was another lifetime, child. Your current circumstances are well known throughout the county. Those who attend the Duke's ball will see exactly what they expect to see. A young woman who has fallen from grace, serving those more fortunate than herself. But why?" The question escaped before Philippa could contain it. What purpose does this cruelty serve? Constance's expression hardened further. "You dare question me? After I have provided you with shelter and employment these 5 years? Perhaps you would prefer to seek your fortune elsewhere, without references, without connections, without a single shilling to your name?" The threat hung in the air between them. Philippa knew with absolute certainty that Constance would carry it out. Cast from Redfield Manor, she would have nowhere to go, no means of survival. The workhouse awaited those without family or fortune, and Constance's spite was sufficient to ensure every door in society remained closed. "I will do as you command, my lady," Philippa said quietly, though each word tasted of ashes. "Excellent. I knew you would see reason." Constance reached for a letter on her bedside table. "The ball is tomorrow evening. You will travel with us in the servant's wagon and be properly attired. Mrs. Henley will prepare your uniform." She waved her hand in dismissal. "You may go. Send Lavinia to me when she wakes." Philippa descended the stairs with mechanical precision, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what had been decreed. To appear before London society not merely as a reduced gentlewoman, but as a servant in her own right. The humiliation was calculated and absolute. Mrs. Henley waited in the kitchen, taking one look at Philippa's face before pulling her into the pantry, away from the curious eyes of the remaining staff. "What has she done now?" the older woman demanded. When Philippa explained, Mrs. Henley's face flushed with anger. "That vicious creature. She means to destroy whatever shred of dignity you have left." "She has succeeded," Philippa replied, her voice hollow. "Tomorrow night, every person who once knew me as Lady Philippa will see me serving champagne in a maid's uniform. There will be no recovery from such disgrace. Then you must refuse. Run away tonight. I have a sister in Cornwall. And what would I do in Cornwall without references or means?" Philippa shook her head. "No, Mrs. Henley. I will endure this as I have endured everything else. Perhaps humiliation builds character, as the philosophers suggest." The bitter attempt at humor fell flat. Mrs. Henley gripped Philippa's hands tightly. "Your father would have fought this with every breath in his body. That will was falsified. I know it in my bones. Mr. Fairchild knows it too. We simply need proof. Proof changes nothing without power to enforce it," Philippa said gently. "I learned that lesson long ago." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Lavinia and Eugenia spent hours discussing their ball gowns, debating jewels and hairstyles, while Philippa moved silently through her duties. When evening fell, she retreated to her attic room and sat at the small window, looking out over the gardens her mother had once tended. Tomorrow she would walk through the grand doors of Greymont Manor not as a guest, but as a servant. She would pour wine for ladies who had once called her friend, and serve cakes to gentlemen who had once sought her hand. The daughter of an earl, reduced to this. Yet somewhere deep within, beneath the layers of resignation and grief, a small spark of determination remained. She was still Lady Philippa Wycliffe, no matter what uniform she wore. Constance could control her circumstances, but she could not touch the core of who Philippa truly was. That would have to be enough to carry her through the ordeal ahead. The journey to Greymont Manor took place in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Philippa rode in the servant's wagon, separated from Constance and her half-sisters, who traveled in the family carriage. The rough wooden bench offered little comfort, and the plain black dress Mrs. Henley had reluctantly provided felt coarse against skin, accustomed to finer fabrics. Greymont rose before them as they approached, its windows blazing with candlelight against the night sky. Philippa had attended balls here in her youth, entering through the grand front doors with her father's arm to support her. Tonight, she would slip through the servants' entrance like any other hired help. The ballroom glittered with the cream of society. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across silk gowns in every color imaginable. Gentlemen in immaculate evening dress moved with the confidence of those who had never questioned their place in the world. The air hummed with conversation, laughter, and the subtle rustle of expensive fabric. Philippa stood against the wall with the other servants, a silver tray of champagne flutes balanced in her hands. She kept her gaze lowered, hoping to avoid recognition, yet she could feel curious eyes upon her. Several guests had indeed known her in better days. "Is that not the Wycliffe girl?" whispered Lady Hartwell to her companion, not quite quietly enough. "Poor creature. I heard her stepmother has put her to work." "Dreadful business," came the reply, "though I suppose someone must pour the wine." Philippa's fingers tightened on the tray, but she maintained her composure. This was precisely the humiliation Constance had intended. Across the room, Lavinia preened in pink satin, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls. Eugenia stood beside her in a gown of emerald green, both sisters basking in the attention of young gentlemen who seemed drawn to beauty like moths to flame. Adrian Fairmont, Duke of Greymont, stood near the entrance greeting late arrivals. At 33, he commanded attention without apparent effort. His dark hair was cut fashionably short, emphasizing the strong lines of his face. The blue-gray eyes that surveyed his guests held an intelligence that suggested he missed very little. Lord Nathaniel Pembroke approached his friend with 2 glasses of whiskey. At 30, Nathaniel possessed an easy charm that balanced Adrian's more reserved nature. "Quite the crush tonight," he observed. "Your mother would have been pleased." "She would have been appalled by the extravagance," Adrian corrected dryly, accepting the glass. "But yes, the attendance is satisfactory." His gaze swept the ballroom methodically, noting the arrangement of guests, the efficiency of his staff, the general atmosphere. It was during this survey that his attention snagged on something unexpected. A young woman moved through the crowd with a silver tray, offering champagne to the assembled company. There was something unusual in her bearing, a grace that contradicted her servant's dress. She held herself with subtle pride, her spine straight, her movements economical rather than hurried. When she offered the tray to Lady Pemberton, he noticed the precise angle of her curtsy, too refined for a common maid. "Who is that?" Adrian murmured, more to himself than Nathaniel. His friend followed his gaze. "Which one?" "There are several servants circulating. The one in black near the windows. The one who moves as though the floor might break beneath careless steps." Nathaniel studied the young woman in question, then shrugged. "A hired servant, I presume. Though you're right, there's something different about her. Perhaps she's from a household that maintains higher standards." Adrian's attention was drawn away by the arrival of Lady Millicent Hargrove. The widow swept into the ballroom wearing crimson silk that emphasized her dark hair and fair complexion. At 30 years of age, she remained one of London's acknowledged beauties, though those who knew her well detected calculation behind every smile. "Your Grace," she purred, extending her hand for him to bow over. "What a magnificent assembly you've gathered. Lady Millicent," Adrian acknowledged politely, but without particular warmth. "I trust you're enjoying the season." "Immensely, though I confess I've been hoping for a private moment with you. There are matters we should discuss." Before Adrian could deflect, Nathaniel smoothly intervened. "Lady Millicent, you must tell me about your recent trip to Bath. I understand the waters were particularly beneficial this year." As Nathaniel drew the widow into conversation, Adrian caught the flash of irritation in her eyes. Their brief courtship 2 years prior had ended by mutual agreement. Or so he had believed. Lately, Millicent seemed intent on rekindling something Adrian had no desire to revive. His attention returned to the unusual servant. She had moved closer now, offering champagne to a group near the orchestra. One of the young ladies in the group, a blonde in pink satin, said something sharp, and the servant's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly before she curtsied and moved away. Adrian frowned. Something about the interaction struck him as wrong, though he could not immediately identify why. The evening progressed through the expected rituals. A quadrille was danced, followed by a country dance. Supper would be announced shortly, after which the company would adjourn to the dining room. Adrian performed his duties as host, dancing with the appropriate young ladies, ensuring his guests were content, all while part of his attention remained fixed on the servant in black. It was his habit to review the guest list before events. The name Wycliffe had caught his eye. Lady Constance Wycliffe, widow of the late Earl of Redfield, attending with her daughters. He had a vague memory of the Earl, a decent man who had died some years back. Searching his memory, Adrian recalled something about the Earl having daughters, though he could not remember specific details. The crash of breaking glass drew every eye in the ballroom. Lavinia Wycliffe stood with wine staining the bodice of her pink gown, her face contorted with fury. Before her, the servant in black held an empty silver tray, her expression carefully blank. "You clumsy fool," Lavinia's voice carried across the sudden silence. "Look what you've done. This gown cost more than you'll earn in a lifetime." "I apologize, miss," the servant said quietly. "It was an accident." "An accident?" Lavinia's voice rose higher. "I saw you deliberately tilt that tray. You're jealous, aren't you? Jealous of your betters." Several guests had begun to murmur, some in sympathy with Lavinia, others looking uncomfortable. Adrian moved forward, Nathaniel following. As he approached, Adrian noticed several things simultaneously. The servant's hands were trembling slightly, though her face remained composed. The angle of the spilled wine suggested the tray had been knocked from below, rather than tipped from above. And most tellingly, Lavinia's own hand bore traces of wine on the fingers, evidence she had grabbed at the tray herself. "Is there a difficulty?" Adrian inquired, his voice cutting through the whispers. Lavinia immediately adopted a wounded expression. "Your Grace, this servant ruined my gown through carelessness. I demand she be dismissed immediately." Adrian's gaze moved to the servant, who had raised her eyes to meet his. For a brief moment, he glimpsed something in those green depths. Intelligence, dignity, and carefully suppressed despair. Then she lowered her gaze again, her expression shuddering. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Philippa, your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Just Philippa, no surname offered. Yet something about her voice, cultured despite her station, sent recognition flickering at the edges of his consciousness. "And you are employed by Lady Constance Wycliffe?" "Yes, your Grace." Adrian turned his attention to Lavinia. "Miss Wycliffe, I observed the incident from across the room. The tray appeared to be knocked from below, not carelessly handled from above. Perhaps your gesture toward the refreshment table caused the unfortunate collision." Lavinia's face flushed. "I did no such thing." "Are you suggesting," Adrian interrupted coldly, "that I am mistaken in what I witnessed in my own ballroom?" The silence that followed was absolute. Every guest recognized the dangerous edge in the Duke's voice. To contradict him directly would be social suicide. "I know, your Grace," Lavinia stammered. "Perhaps I was mistaken about the cause. Indeed. I suggest you retire to have your gown attended to. My staff will provide appropriate facilities." His gaze moved to the servant. "You may continue your duties." Philippa curtsied deeply. "Thank you, your Grace." As she turned away, Adrian caught Nathaniel's questioning look. His friend's expression suggested curiosity, and perhaps mild surprise at the Duke's intervention on behalf of a servant over a guest. The incident concluded, the ball resumed its rhythm. Yet Adrian found his attention returning repeatedly to the young woman in the plain black dress. She moved with careful precision now, as though determined to give no further cause for criticism. When the supper dance was announced, Lady Millicent appeared at Adrian's side. "You were quite gallant to defend that poor servant," she said. though her tone suggested she found his action peculiar rather than admirable. "Though, I confess, I'm surprised you involved yourself in such a trivial matter." "Injustice is never trivial," Adrian replied curtly. After midnight, as guests began departing, Adrian stood near the entrance hall, bidding farewell to those leaving early. He observed Lady Constance Wycliffe ushering her daughters toward their carriage, followed at a discreet distance by several servants, including the young woman who had captured his attention. On impulse, Adrian gestured to his butler, Harrison, who arranged the additional staff for this evening. "Mrs. Crawford from the village, Your Grace. She provides reliable servants for such occasions." All of them came through Mrs. Crawford, with the exception of those brought by Lady Constance Wycliffe, Your Grace. She insisted her own staff would attend to her daughter's particular needs. Adrian watched through the window as the Wycliffe party departed. The family carriage pulled away first, followed some minutes later by the servant's wagon. Something about the entire situation troubled him, though he could not articulate precisely what. "Nathaniel," he said, turning to find his friend observing him with amusement. "What do you know of the Wycliffe family? Lady Constance? Remarried after her first husband's death, if memory serves. The daughters are considered beauties, though perhaps lacking in temperament. Why? The Earl of Redfield? That was her late husband? I believe so. Died 5 or 6 years ago. There was some talk at the time about the estate being in difficulties." Adrian fell silent, his mind working. Something nagged at him, a connection he could not quite grasp. The unusual servant with her refined bearing and cultured voice. The name, Philippa, the Wycliffe connection. "Harrison," he called again. "Bring me the guest list for this evening." Later, in his study, Adrian examined the names carefully. Lady Constance Wycliffe, accompanied by Miss Lavinia Wycliffe and Miss Eugenia Wycliffe. No mention of additional family members or servants by name. Yet he distinctly remembered something about the late Earl having daughters. Plural, more than 2. Adrian rose and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. The memory of green eyes meeting his for a brief, unguarded moment would not leave his mind. Those were not the eyes of a common servant. They were the eyes of someone who had known better circumstances and fallen far. He would discover the truth. Whatever mystery surrounded the young woman in the plain black dress, Adrian Fairmont had never been one to leave questions unanswered. The morning after the ball, Adrian sat in his study with Mr. Thomas Whitmore, a solicitor whose discretion had served the Greymont family for 2 decades. The man's gray hair and sharp eyes suggested both experience and intelligence. "I need information about the Wycliffe family," Adrian began without preamble. "Specifically, the late Earl of Redfield and his children." Mr. Whitmore withdrew a small notebook from his coat. "The Earl died approximately 5 years ago, Your Grace. His widow, Lady Constance, currently holds a tutela arrangement over the estate until the elder daughter reaches majority or marries with her approval." "Elder daughter?" Adrian's attention sharpened. "How many daughters did the Earl have?" 3, Your Grace. Lady Philippa, the eldest from his first marriage, and 2 younger daughters from his union with Lady Constance, Miss Lavinia and Miss Eugenia. 3 daughters. Yet only 2 had attended his ball as guests. Adrian leaned forward, the pieces beginning to align. "Where is Lady Philippa now?" Mr. Whitmore's expression grew uncomfortable. "That is somewhat difficult to ascertain, Your Grace. She appears to have vanished from society following her father's death. Some believe she retired to the country. Others suggest she may have sought employment as a governess. Or perhaps," Adrian said quietly, "she never left Redfield Manor at all." The solicitor's eyes widened with understanding. "Your Grace, if you're suggesting what I believe you are, I require a complete investigation into the Wycliffe estate. Financial records, the terms of the Earl's will, any documentation regarding the tutela arrangement. I want to know exactly how Lady Constance gained control and what has become of the eldest daughter. That may take several days, Your Grace. Perhaps as much as a week." "You have 3 days," Adrian replied curtly. "Spare no expense." After Whitmore departed, Adrian stood at the window overlooking the grounds. The image of green eyes meeting his across the ballroom refused to fade. A young woman forced to serve at a ball in her own servant's clothing, enduring humiliation with quiet dignity. If his suspicions proved correct, the injustice was monstrous. 3 days later, Mr. Whitmore returned with information that confirmed Adrian's darkest suspicions. Lady Philippa Wycliffe, daughter of the late Earl of Redfield, had been systematically reduced from heiress to unpaid servant in her own home. The tutela documents showed irregularities that suggested potential forgery, though proving such would require access to the original will, if it still existed. "There's more, Your Grace," Whitmore added gravely. "I spoke with several former servants of the Redfield household who have since found employment elsewhere. They paint a disturbing picture of Lady Constance's treatment of her stepdaughter. The transformation began gradually after the Earl's death and has progressed to what amounts to servitude. And the estate administrator, Mr. Edmund Fairchild? Still in Lady Constance's employ. However, my inquiries suggest he may not be entirely comfortable with the situation. One of the former servants mentioned that Mr. Fairchild keeps meticulous records of all estate transactions." Adrian's mind worked rapidly. "Arrange a meeting with Mr. Fairchild. Somewhere private, away from Redfield Manor. Make it clear I wish to discuss potential investment opportunities in the area. Men of business rarely refuse an audience with a duke." The meeting took place 2 days later at a coaching inn halfway between Greymont and Redfield. Edmund Fairchild arrived promptly, a man of perhaps 40 years with the careful bearing of someone accustomed to navigating difficult situations. "Your Grace," he bowed respectfully, "I confess myself surprised by your interest in our region. We are a quiet corner of England, not typically worthy of ducal attention." Adrian gestured for him to sit. "I find myself intrigued by investment possibilities. Your estate, Redfield Manor, came to my attention recently. I understand Lady Constance has been managing affairs since her husband's passing." A flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps guilt, crossed Fairchild's face. "Indeed, Your Grace. Lady Constance has been most diligent in her oversight. And the eldest daughter, Lady Philippa? Does she not assist in managing her father's legacy?" Fairchild's teacup rattled slightly against its saucer. "Lady Philippa's circumstances have changed since her father's death, Your Grace." "Changed how, precisely?" Adrian's voice remained mild, but his eyes were intent. The administrator was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Your Grace, I believe I know why you've summoned me here. You saw her at your ball, did you not? Serving as a maid. I saw a young woman with the bearing and speech of someone far above her apparent station," Adrian confirmed. "A young woman who endured public humiliation with remarkable composure." Fairchild's shoulders sagged. "I have kept silent for 5 years, Your Grace. Silent while Lady Constance systematically destroyed that poor girl's life. I told myself it was not my place to interfere, that I had no proof of wrongdoing, that speaking out would only cost me my position without helping Lady Philippa. And now? Now a Duke of the Realm has taken notice." Fairchild met Adrian's gaze directly. "I have records, Your Grace. Detailed accounts of every questionable transaction, every suspicious alteration to estate documents, every instance of funds diverted from their proper purpose. I have maintained these records in secret, hoping that someday they might serve justice. Why? Because the late Earl was a good man who loved his daughter dearly," Fairchild said simply. He spoke often of his plans for Lady Philippa's future. Those plans never included servitude. Whatever document Lady Constance produced after his death, I do not believe it reflects his true wishes. Adrian leaned back, satisfaction settling over him. "Mr. Fairchild, how would you feel about a change in circumstance? I find myself in need of expertise regarding local investments. Your continued employment at Redfield Manor would be essential, but your loyalty would shift to someone more worthy of it." Understanding dawned in the administrator's eyes. "What do you require of me, Your Grace?" "Information, documentation, and most importantly, cooperation when the time comes to challenge Lady Constance's control." Adrian's voice hardened. That time is coming sooner than she anticipates. A week after the ball, Adrian arrived at Redfield Manor in an elegant carriage, announced and entirely unexpected. Lady Constance received him in the drawing room, her surprise poorly concealed beneath a veneer of gracious hospitality. Your Grace, what an extraordinary honor. Had I known you intended to call, I would have prepared more suitable. I require no special preparations, Lady Constance. Adrian interrupted smoothly. I've come on a matter of business. I'm considering investments in this region and thought to consult with landowners of substance regarding opportunities and challenges. Constance's eyes gleamed with calculation. A duke seeking her counsel could only enhance her social standing. Of course, Your Grace. I would be delighted to offer whatever insights I possess. Excellent. I shall require regular consultations over the coming weeks, and I prefer detailed records during our discussions. I understand you employ staff capable of taking notes? Naturally, Your Grace. My daughters are both accomplished. I need someone familiar with estate management, not social accomplishments, Adrian said dismissively. Someone who understands accounts and land management. Surely you have such a person in your household. Constance's smile faltered slightly. I have an administrator, Mr. Fairchild, who will be present to provide his expertise. But I require someone to document our discussions for my later review. Someone literate and familiar with the property. Adrian's gaze was penetrating. You do have such a person available, do you not? The trap was neatly laid. To admit she had no one suitable would suggest incompetent management. Yet to provide someone too educated might raise questions about why such a person served in a menial capacity. Yes, Your Grace. I have someone who can serve that function. Excellent. Have them present for our meeting tomorrow afternoon. 2:00. I shall return then. The following afternoon, Philippa stood in the drawing room wearing one of her old day dresses, still outdated and unfashionable, but at least not a servant's uniform. Constance had been forced to make her presentable for the Duke's visit, though the woman's fury at being manipulated into this situation had been evident. You will sit silently, take notes, and speak only if directly addressed, Constance hissed before Adrian's arrival. One word out of place, one attempt to draw attention to yourself, and I will make your life even more unbearable than it already is. Do you understand? Yes, my lady, Philippa replied quietly, though her heart raced. She had not expected to see the Duke again, certainly not in these circumstances. When Adrian entered, his eyes found hers immediately. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement, understanding. Then his attention shifted to Constance with aristocratic courtesy. Lady Constance, thank you for accommodating my request. He nodded toward Philippa. And this is your assistant? Lady Philippa, Your Grace, Constance said tightly, unable to completely hide her identity without appearing to lie to a duke. My late husband's daughter from his first marriage. She assists with household management. Lady Philippa. Adrian inclined his head with exactly the respect due to the daughter of an earl. I trust you are comfortable serving in this capacity. It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. Philippa met his gaze steadily. I am grateful for the opportunity to be useful, Your Grace. The first meeting focused on agricultural yields and tenant management. Adrian asked detailed questions that required both Constance and Mr. Fairchild to provide answers while Philippa documented everything in her clear, precise handwriting. Throughout, Adrian ensured she was treated with the courtesy due to her birth, consistently addressing her as Lady Philippa and requesting her opinion on administrative details. Constance's discomfort grew with each passing minute. Over the following weeks, Adrian's visits became regular occurrences. Sometimes he brought Lord Nathaniel Pembroke, whose easy conversation helped normalize the unusual arrangement. During these sessions, Philippa's role expanded from mere note-taker to participant in discussions, as Adrian increasingly sought her insights on estate matters. Lady Philippa, he said during the fourth visit, you mentioned last week that the eastern tenant cottages required repair. Have those issues been addressed? Philippa glanced at Constance, who nodded curtly. Not yet, Your Grace. The expense has been deemed not urgent. Yet you indicated the roof leaks were affecting the family's health. Adrian's tone was casual, but his eyes held steel. In my experience, tenant welfare directly impacts productivity. Delayed repairs often cost more in the long term. Lady Philippa sometimes exaggerates minor inconveniences. Constance interjected sharply. Does she? Adrian's gaze remained on Philippa. "Tell me, Lady Philippa, what did you observe specifically?" Forced to respond, Philippa detailed the conditions she had personally witnessed before her reduction in circumstances allowed her to move freely among the cottages. Her descriptions were precise and damning. When the meeting concluded, Adrian stood to take his leave. As Constance escorted him to the entrance, he paused. "Lady Philippa's knowledge of the estate is remarkable. I shall require her presence at all future meetings. Her insights prove invaluable." It was not a request. That evening, Philippa returned to her attic room to find Mrs. Henley waiting with tears in her eyes. "He knows, doesn't he? The Duke knows what she's done to you." "I believe he suspects," Philippa replied carefully. "But suspicion and proof are different matters." "Mr. Fairchild spoke with him," Mrs. Henley whispered. "I saw them at the inn last week. Oh, my dear, perhaps rescue is finally coming." Philippa wanted to believe it, yet 5 years of disappointment had taught her caution. "Perhaps," she said softly, "or perhaps I am simply being used as a convenient source of information about the estate." But late that night, lying in her narrow bed, she allowed herself a small spark of hope. The Duke had looked at her not with pity, but with respect. He had addressed her by her proper title, sought her opinions, treated her as the lady she had been born to be. Whatever his ultimate motives, for a few hours each week, she was Lady Philippa Wickliffe again, and that small restoration of dignity meant more than he could possibly know. The proposal came during what appeared to be a routine meeting about estate improvements. Adrian sat across from Lady Constance in the drawing room of Redfield Manor, Mr. Whitmore's leather portfolio resting on the table between them. Philippa occupied her usual seat near the window, prepared to take notes, while Edmund Fairchild stood ready to provide financial details. "Lady Constance," Adrian began without preamble, "my review of Redfield's accounts reveals significant debt accumulated over the past several years, debts that threaten the estate's viability." Constance's smile froze. "I'm certain there are minor obligations, Your Grace, but nothing that cannot be managed with proper £17,000, Adrian interrupted quietly. "Owed to various creditors throughout the county. Some debts are approaching their collection deadlines." The color drained from Constance's face. Across the room, Philippa's pen stilled above her notebook. She had known the estate struggled, but the magnitude of the figure shocked even her. "How did you—" Constance began, then stopped herself. Mr. Fairchild had no authority to share such private information. "Mr. Fairchild answered questions I posed directly," Adrian replied coolly. "As the largest landholder in this region, I make it my business to understand the financial health of neighboring properties. Instability affects us all." Edmund Fairchild stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace speaks accurately, my lady. The debts are documented and verifiable." Constance's hands gripped the arms of her chair. "What is your interest in this matter, Your Grace? Surely a duke has better occupations than monitoring the private affairs of a widow." "My interest lies in preventing the collapse of a historic estate and the suffering that would follow," Adrian said. "I'm prepared to purchase all outstanding debts associated with Redfield Manor. The estate would then owe only me, under terms far more favorable than your current arrangements." For a moment, naked relief crossed Constance's features. Then suspicion narrowed her eyes. "And what would you require in return for such generosity?" "Changes in management," Adrian stated flatly. "Mr. Fairchild will continue as administrator, but Lady Philippa will be installed as co-administrator with full authority over household expenditures and tenant relations. All financial decisions will require both their signatures." "Absolutely not!" Constance surged to her feet. "I am the guardian of this estate until Lavinia marries. I will not surrender control to—" "You surrendered control the moment you allowed the debt to reach such catastrophic levels," Adrian interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "Your guardianship remains legally intact. I'm not challenging that. But the financial management clearly requires more capable hands." Philippa sat frozen, scarcely daring to breathe. She could feel Constance's fury radiating across the room. This is unconscionable, Constance said. "I am the guardian of this estate until Lavinia marries. I will not surrender control the moment you allowed the debt to reach such catastrophic levels." "This is unconscionable," Constance hissed. "You have no right." "I have every right to set conditions on my own investment," Adrian countered. "You may accept my terms, Or you may explain to your creditors why you refused assistance that would have saved Redfield Manor. I'm certain they'll be understanding when they force you into bankruptcy." The threat hung in the air, undeniable in its implications. Bankruptcy would destroy not only Constance but her daughter's prospects as well. No gentleman would consider marrying into a family tainted by such scandal. "There is another matter," Adrian continued, his tone softening slightly. "Lady Philippa cannot fulfill her new responsibilities while dressed in servant's clothing. She will require an appropriate wardrobe befitting her station and her role as estate co-administrator. I've arranged for a modiste from London to visit within the week. I cannot possibly afford—" Constance began. "The expense will be covered separately, not drawn from estate funds," Adrian said dismissively. "Consider it an investment in proper representation." Constance's lips pressed into a thin line. She was trapped, and everyone in the room recognized it. "You leave me little choice, Your Grace. I leave you the choice between survival and ruin," Adrian corrected. "The decision is yours, but I require an answer today. My solicitor has prepared documents for your signature if you accept." Mr. Whitmore produced a thick sheaf of papers from his portfolio. Edmund Fairchild stepped forward to review them, nodding occasionally as he scanned the terms. "The conditions are as stated, my lady," Edmund confirmed. "Your legal guardianship remains intact, but financial oversight passes to Lady Philippa and myself jointly. The Duke's loan terms are generous, 4% interest over 10 years, with repayment schedules adjusted to accommodate agricultural cycles. And if I refuse?" Constance asked weakly. "Your creditors begin collection proceedings within 30 days, Mr. Whitmore replied matter-of-factly. "I've already spoken with several. They're aware of this negotiation and await your decision." Constance sank back into her chair, defeat evident in the slump of her shoulders. After a long moment, she reached for the pen Mr. Whitmore offered. "Very well. I accept your terms." As Constance signed, Philippa caught Mrs. Henley's face visible through the partially open door to the hallway. The older woman's expression radiated fierce satisfaction. The transformation began immediately. The London modiste, a brisk woman named Mrs. Ashton, arrived 3 days later with 2 assistants and enough fabric samples to outfit a small army. She took one look at Philippa and clicked her tongue. "Dreadful," Mrs. Ashton declared, circling Philippa with a critical eye. "Absolutely dreadful. When did you last wear proper stays, child?" 5 years ago, Philippa admitted quietly. "Well, we shall remedy that immediately. You have excellent deportment. The bones of a lady are still visible despite this travesty of clothing." She turned to her assistants. "Begin with measurements. We'll need day dresses, walking dresses, at least 2 evening gowns, proper undergarments, and accessories." His Grace was quite specific about quality. Over the following week, Philippa stood for endless fittings, while Mrs. Ashton and her staff constructed a wardrobe appropriate for the daughter of an earl. The fabrics were fine, but not ostentatious. Muted greens that complemented her eyes, soft blues, a dove gray that somehow made her look elegant rather than drab. "His Grace has excellent taste," Mrs. Ashton remarked during one fitting. "He selected these colors himself, you know. Said they would suit your complexion." Philippa's heart performed an unexpected flutter at the revelation, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Henley became Philippa's fierce ally during this transformation, ensuring she ate proper meals instead of kitchen scraps, that her hands received treatment to soften the damage from years of harsh work, that her hair was properly cared for. "You're becoming yourself again," the older woman said one evening, tears in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud. Father would be horrified by what it took to reach this point." Philippa replied softly. "Rescued by a duke's intervention rather than standing on my own. Pride is a luxury you couldn't afford," Mrs. Henley countered. "Accept the help that's offered, child. Heaven knows you've earned it." The first public appearance came at a garden party hosted by Lord and Lady Pemberton. Nathaniel had extended the invitation directly to Adrian, who had in turn insisted Philippa accompany him as his advisor on local matters. "People will talk," Philippa warned as Adrian's carriage bore them toward the Pemberton estate. "People always talk," Adrian replied calmly. "The question is whether they speak truth or fiction. By the time we finish, they'll understand exactly what you are. a lady of quality, who was temporarily reduced by circumstance, but never diminished in character. The garden party attendees' reactions ranged from shocked to scandalized to grudgingly admiring. Philippa walked at Adrian's side wearing a dress of soft sage green, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, looking every inch the lady she had been born to be. Lady Pemberton greeted them with warm enthusiasm. "Lady Philippa, how delightful to see you looking so well. We've all been terribly concerned about your situation. Your Grace has been most generous in assisting Redfield Manor's recovery." Philippa replied smoothly. "His business acumen has proven invaluable." Nathaniel appeared at Adrian's elbow, offering a slight bow to Philippa. "Lady Philippa, you're a vision. That color suits you remarkably well. Thank you, Lord Pembroke." She accepted his gallantry with the grace of someone who had never forgotten how to navigate society despite years of absence. Throughout the afternoon, Nathaniel remained nearby, his easy conversation and obvious approval lending social weight to Philippa's return. When Lady Hartwell made a pointed comment about sudden changes in circumstance, Nathaniel smoothly deflected with praise for Philippa's estate management skills. "Adrian tells me you've revolutionized Redfield's tenant relations," Nathaniel said loud enough for nearby listeners to hear. "Apparently productivity has increased significantly under your oversight." "I merely implemented systems my father believed in," Philippa replied modestly. "The tenants respond well to fair treatment and timely attention to their needs." From across the garden, Lady Millicent Hargrove observed the scene with barely concealed fury. She had arrived hoping to monopolize Adrian's attention, only to find him entirely focused on the Wycliffe woman everyone thought had vanished into genteel poverty. Millicent's own circumstances had grown desperate. Her late husband's debts had proven far more extensive than anticipated, and her widow's portion would barely maintain her current lifestyle for another year. She needed remarriage, preferably to someone wealthy and well-positioned. Adrian had seemed her best prospect, a duke with no current attachments and a fortune that could erase her financial concerns. Now this ghost from the past had materialized, looking far too comfortable at Adrian's side. "Quite the transformation," murmured Lady Pemberton's sister, joining Millicent near the refreshment table. "Though I suppose a generous patron can work wonders." "Indeed," Millicent replied, her mind already working through possibilities. If Philippa Wycliffe represented a threat to Millicent's plans, then Philippa would need to be dealt with. One did not survive in society without learning how to eliminate competition. As the afternoon waned, Adrian escorted Philippa back to his carriage. Once they were enclosed in privacy, he turned to her with an appraising look. "You handled yourself admirably. Not a single misstep." "I was raised for this," Philippa said simply. 5 years of servitude couldn't erase 22 years of training." "No," Adrian agreed quietly, "but it could have broken your spirit. Yet you stand here unbroken." Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, respect, and the first stirrings of something neither was quite ready to name. At Redfield Manor, Mrs. Henley waited at the door, her face alight with hope. When Philippa descended from the carriage and walked toward her, wearing that elegant dress, moving with the confidence of restored dignity, the older woman wept openly. "Welcome home, Lady Philippa," she whispered. "Welcome home." The weeks following the garden party established a new rhythm. Philippa attended social events at Adrian's side. Her presence gradually normalized as society adjusted to her restored position. Mrs. Henley made regular visits from Redfield Manor, bringing updates on estate matters and offering quiet encouragement. "The tenants speak highly of you," Mrs. Henley reported during one such visit. "They say Lady Philippa remembers their names, asks after their children, listens when they voice concerns. Your father would be proud." Philippa smiled, pouring tea in the sitting room of Greymont Manor, where Adrian had insisted she maintain chambers for convenience. "I merely treat them as people deserving respect. It requires no extraordinary talent, yet it's extraordinary how rare such treatment has become," Mrs. Henley replied. Lady Constance never once visited the cottages during her years of control. The mention of Constance brought a shadow across Philippa's expression. Her stepmother had grown increasingly hostile since losing financial authority, though she maintained the veneer of civility when Adrian was present. Lavinia and Eugenia watched these developments with barely concealed bitterness. their own prospects diminishing as Philippa's circumstances improved. It was at a musical hosted by Lady Pemberton that disaster struck. The evening had progressed pleasantly enough. A talented soprano had performed selections from Mozart, followed by a string quartet. During the interval, guests mingled in the drawing room while refreshments were served. Philippa stood near the windows with Nathaniel, discussing agricultural innovations, when Lady Millicent Hargrove approached with Constance at her side. "Lady Philippa," Millicent greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely you look this evening. That sapphire necklace is particularly striking." Philippa's hand moved instinctively to the jewels at her throat, a loan from Adrian for the occasion, as her own jewelry had long since been sold by Constance. "Thank you, Lady Millicent. His Grace was kind enough to provide it. How very generous." Millicent purred. "Though I confess myself surprised the Duke trusts such valuable pieces to someone with your complicated history." Nathaniel stiffened beside Philippa. "I'm certain I don't take your meaning, Lady Millicent." "No offense intended, Lord Pembroke," Millicent replied smoothly. "I merely observe that circumstances can change so rapidly. One day a servant, the next adorned in ducal jewels. It must be quite overwhelming." Before Philippa could formulate a response, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. Lady Pemberton stood with her hand pressed to her throat, her face pale. "My brooch," she gasped. "The ruby brooch my late mother gave me. It was pinned to my shawl just moments ago, and now it's gone." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled guests. The brooch in question was well known. A magnificent piece featuring rubies set in gold, worth several £100 at minimum. "Perhaps it fell," suggested one guest. "We should search the area," offered another. Lady Pemberton's eyes swept the room, then fixed on Philippa with an expression of dawning horror. "Lady Philippa, I don't wish to cause offense, but you were standing quite near my shawl earlier when we spoke about the music." The implication hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Philippa felt the weight of every gaze turning toward her, speculation and suspicion evident in numerous faces. "I assure you, Lady Pemberton, I had no contact with your belongings," Philippa said steadily, though her heart raced. "Of course you didn't," Nathaniel interjected firmly. "The very suggestion is absurd." "Is it?" Constance spoke for the first time, her voice carrying false reluctance. "I hate to speak ill of family, but there have been incidents at Redfield Manor. Small items going missing. Nothing we could prove naturally, but the timing was suspicious." Philippa stared at her stepmother in disbelief. "You're lying. I wish I were." Constance sighed dramatically. "But after years of managing difficult circumstances, one learns to notice patterns. Of course, I never imagined she would stoop to stealing from guests. That's quite enough." Adrian's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. He had been conversing with Lord Pemberton across the room, but now crossed to Philippa's side with deliberate purpose. "Lady Constance, you will retract that accusation immediately." "I merely stated facts, Your Grace," Constance replied, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes at his tone. "Facts?" Adrian's expression was cold enough to freeze water. "Then you won't object to providing evidence supporting these claims." Lady Millicent stepped forward, her expression sorrowful. "Your Grace, I understand you feel protective of Lady Philippa, but we must consider the possibility." "We must consider nothing without proof," Nathaniel interrupted sharply. "This reeks of orchestrated malice." "How dare you?" Millicent's composure cracked slightly. "I have no reason to fabricate such accusations." "Don't you?" Adrian's gaze moved between Millicent and Constance with penetrating intensity. "Lady Millicent, you've made your interest in my person rather obvious. And Lady Constance, your resentment regarding Redfield Manor's management is equally apparent. Tell me, when did you two become such fast friends?" A flush rose in Millicent's cheeks. "Your Grace, I don't appreciate the insinuation." "Then you won't mind if we conduct a thorough search," Adrian stated flatly. "Mr. Fairchild?" Edmund Fairchild stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the doorway, a leather portfolio in his hands. His presence at the music hall had seemed coincidental, but Philippa now understood it had been planned. "Your Grace," Edmund bowed slightly, "I believe these documents may prove relevant." He withdrew several papers, passing them to Adrian. who scanned them quickly before looking up at Constance with contempt. These are records of household items Lady Constance sold without authorization over the past 5 years. Silverware, jewelry, even furniture belonging to the Wycliffe estate. All transactions documented by Mr. Fairchild, who wisely kept detailed accounts. Constance's face drained of color. Those records are private. They're evidence of systematic theft, Adrian corrected coldly. You accuse Lady Philippa of stealing while you've been pillaging her inheritance for years. This proves nothing about the brooch, Millicent insisted desperately. Lady Pemberton's property is still missing. Actually, said a quiet voice from the doorway, I found it. A maid stepped forward, holding the ruby brooch carefully in her palm. It was caught in the fringe of the table covering, my lady. Must have fallen when you set down your shawl and got tangled in the threads. Lady Pemberton exhaled with visible relief, taking the brooch from the maid. Thank heavens. I was so distressed I didn't think to check thoroughly. Her gaze moved to Philippa, genuine remorse in her expression. Lady Philippa, please accept my sincerest apologies. I should never have implied. You didn't imply. Philippa interrupted gently. Others did that quite effectively. The attention shifted back to Constance and Millicent, who stood frozen under the weight of collective disapproval. What had been intended as Philippa's ruin had transformed into their own exposure. Lady Millicent, Adrian said with devastating quietness, I believe you claim no reason to fabricate accusations. Yet here we stand, the brooch found, your conspiracy revealed. I suggest you depart before I make public precisely how desperate your financial situation has become. Millicent's composure shattered completely. You cannot speak to me thus. I can and I have, Adrian replied. Leave, now. She fled, dignity abandoned, leaving Constance to face the consequences alone. As for you, Adrian turned to Constance. Your guardianship of Redfield Manor remains legally intact for now. But make no mistake, I will be watching every action you take. One more attempt to harm Lady Philippa, and I will dedicate my considerable resources to seeing you ruined utterly. Do I make myself clear? Constance managed a stiff nod, before retreating as quickly as propriety allowed. In the silence that followed, Lady Pemberton cleared her throat. Perhaps we might resume the musical program. I believe the string quartet has another set prepared. Gradually, conversation resumed, though the evening's tone had fundamentally changed. Guests who had witnessed the confrontation viewed Philippa with new respect, not as a fallen woman restored by ducal patronage, but as someone who had endured injustice with dignity and emerged vindicated. Later, in Adrian's carriage returning to Greymont, Philippa sat in silence, the evening's events replaying in her mind. Across from her, Adrian watched with concern. You handled that admirably, he said quietly. I did nothing, Philippa replied. You and Lord Pembroke defended me. Mr. Fairchild provided evidence. The maid found the brooch. I merely stood there feeling helpless. You stood there refusing to crumble under false accusations. Adrian corrected. That required more strength than any of our interventions. Philippa met his gaze, finding something there that made her breath catch. Not merely respect or compassion, but something warmer, more personal. Why do you do this? Protect me so fiercely. For a long moment, Adrian was silent. Then he leaned forward slightly, his expression intense. Because the injustice offends me. Because you deserve better. And because, he paused, seeming to struggle with words, because I have come to value your presence in my life more than I anticipated. The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Philippa's heart hammered against her ribs, her carefully maintained composure threatening to dissolve. Your Grace, Adrian, he corrected softly. When we're alone, please, call me Adrian. Adrian, she repeated, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. I don't know what to say. Say nothing tonight, he replied, settling back against the seat. We've both had sufficient drama for one evening. But know this, Philippa. Your enemies have made their move and failed. You're safe now. Whatever comes next, you're safe. As the carriage rolled through the darkness toward Greymont Manor, Philippa allowed herself to believe him, to trust that perhaps, finally, the worst was truly behind her. The days following the confrontation at Lady Pemberton's musicale brought a subtle shift in the dynamic between Philippa and Adrian. Where once their interactions had been defined by duty and pragmatism, something warmer now colored their time together. Adrian began calling at Greymont's sitting room where Philippa had established her working chambers, arriving with books he thought might interest her, maps of estate improvements he wished to discuss, and excuses that grew increasingly transparent as the weeks progressed. "I thought you might find this volume illuminating," he said one morning, presenting a leather-bound treatise on agricultural innovations. The author proposes rotating crops and patterns that might benefit Redfield's southern fields. Philippa accepted the book with a small smile. "Thank you, Adrian, though I suspect you've already read it, and formed opinions you're eager to share." "Guilty," he admitted, settling into the chair across from her desk, with the ease of someone who had claimed that space as his own. "The section on nitrogen-fixing legumes particularly intrigued me. I believe we could implement similar methods across both our estates." They spent the next hour discussing agriculture, their conversation flowing from practical matters to theoretical debates to shared laughter over particularly pompous passages in the text. Philippa found herself watching the way afternoon light caught in Adrian's dark hair, the way his eyes warmed when he grew passionate about a topic, the unconscious grace in his movements. It was dangerous territory, these feelings stirring within her. Gratitude she understood. Adrian had rescued her from servitude, restored her position, protected her from enemies. But this awareness of his proximity, this quickening of her pulse when he entered a room, this tendency to seek his opinion on matters she could easily decide herself, that went beyond gratitude into regions she dared not name. Mrs. Henley noticed, of course. During one of her visits from Redfield Manor, she observed Philippa arranging flowers in a vase with particular care, and shook her head knowingly. "You're falling in love with him," the older woman stated matter-of-factly. Philippa's hands stilled. "I'm grateful to him. There's a difference. Gratitude doesn't make a woman fuss over flowers for an hour." Mrs. Henley countered gently. "Gratitude doesn't put that particular light in your eyes when his name is mentioned. I've known you since birth, child. I recognize love when I see it. Even if I were, which I'm not confirming, it would be foolish," Philippa said quietly. "Adrian has been kind because he abhors injustice. He's protected me because his sense of honor demanded it. To imagine anything more would be to mistake nobility of character for romantic attachment." "And what of the way he looks at you?" Mrs. Henley pressed. "The way he finds reasons to call daily? The care with which he selected your wardrobe colors? Those are not the actions of a man motivated solely by honor." Before Philippa could respond, a knock announced Adrian's arrival for their planned ride through the estate. She rose to greet him, conscious of Mrs. Henley's knowing gaze following her from the room. The rides became a regular occurrence. Adrian on his gray stallion, Philippa on a gentle chestnut mare he'd insisted on acquiring for her use. They explored the boundaries between Greymont and Redfield, discussing improvements and simply enjoying the freedom of open countryside. It was during one such ride that Adrian presented her with an unexpected gift, a leather-bound journal embossed with her initials, for documenting estate observations, he explained, as she ran her fingers over the elegant tooling. "Your insights have proven invaluable. They deserve proper recording. This is beautiful," Philippa breathed, opening it to find pages of fine-quality paper. "Thank you. I noticed you writing notes on loose papers that often went missing," Adrian said, guiding his horse closer to hers. "You deserve better tools for your work." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her more deeply than grand gestures might have. He had noticed her small frustrations, taken steps to alleviate them, all without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. "You're too generous," she murmured. "I'm selfish," Adrian corrected quietly. "I want you to continue working alongside me, which requires ensuring you have everything necessary to do so comfortably." Their eyes met, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Awareness, possibility, potential. Then Philippa looked away, her heart racing in a manner that had nothing to do with their morning ride. The tension continued building through a series of social engagements. At Lady Hartwell's dinner party, Adrian ensured Philippa was seated beside him, their quiet conversations drawing approving nods from those who had witnessed her vindication. At the Pembers Garden luncheon, He remained at her side, despite numerous ladies attempting to monopolize his attention. Nathaniel observed these developments with amusement and, occasionally, concern. One evening at Greymont's library, where both men had retired after dinner while Philippa remained with the ladies, he voiced his thoughts. "You're courting her," Nathaniel stated, pouring brandy for them both. "I'm ensuring she's properly integrated into society," Adrian replied carefully. "Adrian, I've known you since Cambridge. You've never ensured anyone's social integration before." Nathaniel settled into a leather chair. "You're courting Lady Philippa, and I suspect you're doing so without having clarified your intentions to the lady herself." Adrian was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I don't wish to rush her. She's only just begun to regain her footing. To press suit now would seem predatory, as though I expected payment for services rendered. Have you considered that she might be waiting for some indication of your feelings?" Nathaniel suggested. "That she might be uncertain whether your attentions stem from duty or genuine affection?" "She must know," Adrian said, though doubt colored his voice. "Surely my actions speak clearly enough. Women are not mind readers, even remarkably intelligent ones like Lady Philippa." Nathaniel replied dryly. "If you care for her, which you obviously do, perhaps consider actually telling her so." "When the time is right," Adrian agreed quietly. "When I'm certain she's ready to hear it." The conversation lingered in his mind over the following days. Adrian became more deliberate in his courtship, presenting small gifts, a rare botanical sketch, a novel by an author she'd mentioned enjoying, sheet music for a piece she'd played years ago. Each gift was meaningful, personal, chosen with care. Philippa accepted them with growing confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Yet she resisted acknowledging the possibility that Adrian's attentions meant more than benevolent patronage. Her emotions felt too raw, too vulnerable. To believe he cared for her romantically, and then discover she'd misread the situation would be devastating. One evening, after a particularly pleasant dinner at Greymont, where Philippa had stayed unusually late, Adrian walked her to her chambers. They paused at her door, the hallway quiet around them. "I hope you know how much I value your presence here," Adrian said softly. "Not merely your work with the estates, but you. Your conversation, your insights, your company. This house feels more alive with you in it." Philippa's breath caught. "Adrian, you need not respond," he interrupted gently. "I only wanted you to know. Whatever else you might wonder about my motivations, know that they are entirely honorable and entirely personal." He bowed slightly and departed before she could formulate a response, leaving her standing in the hallway with her heart pounding and her carefully constructed defenses trembling. That night, lying in the elegant bed Adrian had provided, Philippa confronted truths she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with him, perhaps had already fallen. But how could she trust these feelings? How could she separate genuine affection from gratitude born of rescue? How could she risk her heart when she'd only just begun to rebuild her life? The questions haunted her through sleepless hours, unresolved and terrifying in their implications. Adrian clearly felt something beyond duty, but what precisely? And more importantly, was she brave enough to discover the answer? For now, she decided, she would continue as they had been, working together, enjoying each other's company, letting whatever existed between them develop at its own pace. She would not press for definitions or declarations. She would simply be, and perhaps in time, clarity would emerge naturally. It was the most she could offer, to him or to herself. The rest would have to wait for courage she wasn't certain she possessed. The summons arrived on a gray morning, delivered by a stern-faced solicitor's clerk who refused to meet Philippa's eyes as he handed over the legal documents. She broke the seal with trembling fingers, Mrs. Henley standing anxiously beside her in the morning room at Greymont Manor. "What is it, child?" the older woman asked. Philippa's voice emerged hollow as she read aloud. "Lady Constance Wycliffe has filed petition with the Court of Chancery, challenging my legitimacy as heir to the Redfield estate. She claims to possess evidence that I am not the natural daughter of the late Earl." The papers slipped from her nerveless fingers, scattering across the carpet. Mrs. Henley retrieved them, her face flushing with fury as she scanned the allegations. "This is madness," Mrs. Henley spat. "Your father adored you. Everyone who knew him recognized you as his daughter. The resemblance alone. Resemblance is not legal proof." Philippa interrupted quietly. "Constance knows this. She's desperate, Mrs. Henley. Adrian's intervention has stripped away her control, exposed her thefts, ruined her standing in society. This is her final weapon. Then we shall fight it," Mrs. Henley declared fiercely. "Your father left letters, documents. I have them still, hidden where that viper could never find them." Before Philippa could respond, Adrian strode into the room, Mr. Whitmore following close behind. One look at Philippa's pale face told him something catastrophic had occurred. "What's happened?" Adrian demanded, crossing to her side. Wordlessly, Philippa gestured to the scattered papers. Adrian gathered them, his expression darkening with each paragraph he read. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. "She's claiming you're illegitimate?" Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. "That your mother's marriage to the Earl was invalid?" "She's claiming my mother was already married when she wed my father," Philippa clarified, her voice steady despite the chaos of her emotions. "That their union was bigamous, rendering me a bastard with no legal claim to the Redfield inheritance." "It's a lie," Mrs. Henley insisted. "Your mother was a widow. Her first husband died of fever 2 years before she met the Earl. The marriage was entirely proper. Can you prove that?" Mr. Whitmore asked gently. "With documentation that would satisfy the Court of Chancery?" Mrs. Henley hesitated. "I have letters from the Earl. Correspondence between your parents before their marriage. Surely those would establish affection but not legal standing." Mr. Whitmore finished regretfully. "We need parish records, marriage certificates, death certificates, documentary proof of the chronology. Then we shall obtain them," Adrian stated flatly. "Mr. Whitmore, send investigators to every parish where Lady Philippa's mother lived. Find those records. Your Grace, such searches could take weeks, perhaps months," the solicitor warned. "And if Lady Constance has already located and destroyed relevant documents—" "She hasn't." Edmund Fairchild's voice came from the doorway. He entered carrying a leather case, his expression grim but determined. Lady Constance made one critical error. She assumed I was too loyal, or too cowardly to act against her. She was wrong on both counts. He opened the case on the table, withdrawing a thick bundle of papers tied with faded ribbon. "These are copies of records I made over the years, Your Grace. Every document I thought might someday prove necessary, including," he pulled out a yellowed certificate, "the death record of William Hathaway, Philippa's mother's first husband. Died April 1789 of yellow fever. Buried at St. Mary's churchyard." Philippa stared at the document, tears blurring her vision. "You kept this, all these years?" "I kept everything," Edmund replied quietly. "Marriage certificates, baptismal records, correspondence. Your father suspected Constance might attempt something after his death. He asked me to maintain duplicate records of all important family documents. I've honored that request." Mr. Whitmore examined the papers with growing satisfaction. "This is excellent, Mr. Fairchild. With these as foundation, we can build an irrefutable case. There's more," Mrs. Henley added, producing a small wooden box from beneath her shawl. "Your father gave me these before he died, Lady Philippa. He said if anything ever happened to threaten your inheritance, I was to deliver them to someone who could help." Inside the box lay a collection of letters in the Earl's own hand, addressed to Philippa, but never sent. Mrs. Henley's voice trembled as she explained. "He wrote these during his final illness, knowing Constance was not what she appeared. He documented everything. His marriage to your mother, the circumstances, his absolute certainty of your legitimacy, and his love for you." Philippa took the letters with shaking hands, her father's familiar script swimming before her eyes. Adrian moved closer, his presence solid and comforting as she struggled to maintain composure. "We have her," Mr. Whitmore said with quiet triumph. "Lady Constance has filed false documents with the court. That alone constitutes fraud. Combined with Mr. Fairchild's records and the Earl's letters, We can not only defend against her claim, but pursue criminal charges. Do it, Adrian ordered. File countersuit immediately. I want Lady Constance to understand the gravity of her mistake. The legal proceedings moved with remarkable speed once Adrian's considerable influence was applied. Within a week, Constance found herself summoned before a magistrate to answer questions about the provenance of her documents. Under oath, with Adrian's solicitors presenting irrefutable proof of fraud, her carefully constructed lies crumbled. Philippa attended the proceedings, seated beside Adrian in the gallery. She watched as Constance's composure disintegrated, as the woman who had tormented her for 5 years was systematically exposed as a liar, a thief, and a fraud. The documents you presented are forgeries, the magistrate stated coldly. You have wasted this court's time with malicious falsehoods. More seriously, you have attempted to deprive an innocent woman of her rightful inheritance through deliberate deception. I was mistaken, Constance stammered. I believed. You believed nothing. The magistrate interrupted. You fabricated evidence in a desperate attempt to regain control of an estate you've been systematically pillaging. The Duke of Greymont's solicitors have presented overwhelming proof of your misconduct. Mr. Whitmore rose. Your Honor, my client requests that Lady Constance be offered a choice. She may face criminal prosecution for fraud, forgery, and theft, charges that carry significant prison terms, or she may sign a full confession, relinquish all claims to the Redfield estate, and depart England permanently. Constance's face went ashen. You cannot. We can, and we shall, Adrian said, standing. His voice carried across the courtroom with unmistakable authority. You have tormented Lady Philippa for 5 years. You reduced a lady of quality to servitude in her own home. You stole her inheritance, her dignity, and attempted to destroy her future. Justice demands consequence. The choice, such as it was no choice at all. 2 days later, Constance signed a confession detailing her manipulation of the Earl's will, her theft of estate assets, and her falsification of documents. In exchange for avoiding prosecution, she agreed to leave England within a fortnight and never return. Lavinia and Eugenia, their futures destroyed by their mother's machinations, were sent to live with a distant aunt in Yorkshire. Their departure from Redfield Manor was quiet and bitter. Neither sister able to meet Philippa's eyes as they climbed into the carriage that would carry them away from everything they had known. Do you feel victorious? Nathaniel asked Philippa, as they stood in Greymont's library the evening after the legal resolution. I feel relieved, Philippa admitted, and exhausted, and strangely sad for what might have been if Constance had chosen differently. You're too generous, Nathaniel observed. After what she did. She was desperate and foolish, Philippa interrupted. I understand desperation, Lord Pembroke. I've lived it. I cannot celebrate her ruin, even though justice required it. Adrian entered the room, stopping short at finding Nathaniel there. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, Nathaniel said smoothly. I was just leaving. Lady Philippa, congratulations on your vindication. It's well deserved. He bowed to them both and departed, closing the door behind him. Alone with Adrian, Philippa felt the carefully maintained composure of the past weeks finally cracking. I almost lost everything, she whispered. If you hadn't helped, if Edmund and Mrs. Henley hadn't kept those records. But they did, Adrian said, moving closer. And you didn't lose anything. You're the rightful heir to Redfield Manor, acknowledged and secure. Because of you. Philippa looked up at him, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time without the fog of gratitude or confusion obscuring her vision. During this entire ordeal, do you know what terrified me most? Not losing Redfield. Not Constance's accusations. It was the thought of losing you. Adrian went very still. Philippa, I love you, she said simply, the words emerging with startling clarity. Not because you rescued me, though you did. Not from gratitude. Though I'm grateful. I love you because you're honorable and kind, and you see me, truly see me, in ways no one else ever has. And if that's not what you want to hear, I apologize. But I cannot pretend otherwise anymore. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. What I want to hear? Philippa, I've been waiting weeks for you to trust me enough to believe I could genuinely care for you. That my interest wasn't obligation or pity, but something far more profound. You care for me? The words emerged tentatively, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. I love you, Adrian corrected firmly. I have for some time, though I've been terrified of rushing you, of making you feel pressured or obligated. You've been through so much. I wanted you to have time to discover your own feelings without the weight of mine influencing you. Philippa laughed, a sound caught between joy and tears. We're both fools then, dancing around each other while being too careful to speak plainly. Then let me speak plainly now, Adrian said, his voice low and intense. I love you, Philippa Wycliffe. I love your strength, your intelligence, your compassion even toward those who've wronged you. I want you in my life not as an obligation or a charity case, but as my partner, my equal, my wife, if you'll have me. The proposal hung between them, simple and honest, and everything Philippa had never dared dream of having. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Adrian, I'll have you. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. The following weeks passed in a blur of joyous preparations. Adrian had suggested they travel to his country estate in Kent, away from London's curious eyes, to plan their future without the weight of society's constant observation. The journey took them through rolling countryside painted in autumn's palette. Amber fields, russet trees, skies that shifted between gray and brilliant blue. Philippa sat beside Adrian in his carriage, their hands linked openly now, no longer constrained by propriety's demands for distance. Nervous? Adrian asked as the estate came into view. Should I be? Philippa countered with a small smile. My grandmother resides here. She's formidable. The Dowager Duchess of Greymont proved exactly that. At 73, Augusta Fairmont retained the posture and presence of royalty. Her silver hair arranged impeccably, her blue eyes sharp as they assessed Philippa. So you're the young woman who has captured my grandson's heart, the Dowager stated without preamble. Sit. Let me look at you properly. Philippa obeyed, feeling rather like a specimen under examination. Adrian stood nearby, tension evident in his shoulders, despite his grandmother's warm reception being more than he'd feared. She's not what I expected, the Dowager announced after a long moment. Better. You have substance, Lady Philippa. Beauty fades, but character endures. Tell me, do you love my grandson? With my whole heart, Philippa replied without hesitation. Good. He needs someone who sees past the title to the man beneath. Someone who won't fawn or simper, or expect him to solve every difficulty without lifting a finger herself. The Dowager's expression softened fractionally. You've known hardship. That will serve you well as a duchess. The position requires strength that pampered girls rarely possess. Thank you, Your Grace, Philippa said, touched by the unexpected endorsement. Call me grandmother. You're family now. The Dowager rose with surprising agility. Adrian, show her the gardens. I'll have tea prepared for later. We have much to discuss regarding the wedding. Outside, walking among late-blooming roses, Adrian exhaled slowly. That went better than anticipated. She can be difficult with those she believes unworthy. And she believes me worthy, Philippa asked, tucking her hand into his arm. She believes you perfect, Adrian corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. As do I. They spent a fortnight at the estate, days filled with planning, and nights spent in long conversations before the library fire. Adrian showed her account books, introduced her to his steward, discussed investments and improvements with the easy assumption that her opinion mattered. It was partnership in the truest sense, built on mutual respect and growing intimacy. I want to marry you soon, Adrian said one evening, firelight casting shadows across his features. Society demands we wait the traditional period, but I find myself remarkably impatient. 4 months, Philippa replied, threading her fingers through his. We can endure 4 months. It will give me time to restore Redfield properly, to ensure everything is in order before I become your wife. Our wife, Adrian corrected. Redfield will remain yours, managed as you see fit. I have no interest in subsuming your inheritance into mine. What's yours remains yours. The consideration in that statement, the recognition of her autonomy, moved Philippa deeply. You're an extraordinary man, Adrian Fairmont. I'm a man who loves you, he replied simply. That colors everything. The engagement announcement appeared in the Times, causing the expected stir among society. Some viewed the match as romantic, the Duke rescuing his beloved from circumstances and elevating her properly. Others whispered about convenience and duty disguised as affection. Neither Adrian nor Philippa cared what strangers thought. Mrs. Henley returned to Redfield Manor with Philippa, supervising the restoration with the authority of her new position as head administrator. The house slowly came back to life. Rooms cleaned and aired, staff hired to proper numbers, gardens tended with the care they deserved. Your father would be so proud, Mrs. Henley said one afternoon as they reviewed household accounts in the study that had once been the Earl's sanctuary. Everything he hoped for you has come to pass. Not quite everything, Philippa corrected gently. He never imagined I would need rescuing from the family he entrusted with my care. But yes, I think he would approve of Adrian. Edmund Fairchild continued as a state supervisor. His years of secret record-keeping vindicated, his loyalty rewarded. Under his and Philippa's joint management, Redfield flourished as it hadn't in years. The wedding took place on a crisp December morning at the chapel on the Greymont estate. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the grounds in pristine white. Philippa wore ivory silk, simple but elegant, her dark hair arranged with pearl combs that had belonged to Adrian's mother. You're beautiful, Mrs. Henley whispered, adjusting the veil with trembling hands. Oh, my dear girl, you're finally getting the happiness you deserve. The ceremony itself was intimate. Family, and close friends only. Nathaniel stood as Adrian's witness, his expression reflecting genuine pleasure at seeing his friend so obviously content. The dowager wept openly, something she later denied with great dignity. When Adrian lifted Philippa's veil and kissed her as husband and wife for the first time, applause echoed through the small chapel. It was not the grand society wedding a duke might have orchestrated, but it was perfect, genuine, warm, filled with people who truly cared for their happiness. The wedding breakfast at Greymont Manor brought laughter and joy. Nathaniel delivered a speech balancing wit and sincerity. The dowager offered sage advice about marriage that made several guests blush. Edmund Fairchild, invited as honored guest rather than mere employee, raised his glass to Philippa's resilience. To the Duchess of Greymont, Edmund declared, may she always remember that strength carried her through darkness into light. That evening, alone at last, Adrian carried Philippa over the threshold of the ducal chambers they would now share. Setting her carefully on her feet, he cupped her face gently. Happy? He asked. Deliriously, Philippa confirmed, reaching up to kiss him, though I still occasionally wonder if I'll wake and find this all a dream. If you do, I'll be there to remind you it's real, Adrian promised. Every day for the rest of our lives. 1 year later, Philippa stood at the window of Redfield Manor's drawing room, watching Adrian ride up the drive. She divided her time between Redfield and Greymont now, managing her family estate with the same dedication she brought to helping Adrian with his holdings. It was the life she had always been meant for, delayed, but finally achieved. He's early, Mrs. Henley observed, entering with tea service. Eager to see you, no doubt. We've been apart 3 days, Philippa laughed. Hardly an eternity. For those in love, 3 days might as well be 3 years, the older woman replied wisely. When Adrian entered, he swept Philippa into an embrace that suggested Mrs. Henley had been correct about his eagerness. They had spent the time apart managing their respective estates, but the separation, while necessary, had been unwelcome. Everything well at Greymont? Philippa asked when he finally released her. Perfectly. The new drainage system is working beautifully. Adrian settled beside her on the settee. And Redfield? Thriving. The harvest exceeded expectations, and Edmund reports the tenants are content. She leaned against his shoulder contentedly. I received a letter from Nathaniel. He's considering marriage himself. About time, Adrian replied, though I doubt he'll find a woman as remarkable as mine. Biased, Philippa teased. Accurate, Adrian corrected, kissing her softly. They sat together as afternoon faded to evening. discussing estate matters and shared dreams, comfortable in the partnership they had built. Outside, snow began falling again, blanketing Redfield in the same peaceful white that had blessed their wedding day. Philippa thought of the girl she had been, serving champagne at a ball in a servant's dress, humiliated and hopeless. That girl seemed a lifetime ago now, though barely 18 months had passed. She had survived darkness and emerged into light, found love where she least expected it, reclaimed dignity that had been stolen. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked, noting her distant expression. "That I'm grateful," Philippa replied honestly. "For Mrs. Henley's loyalty, for Edmund's courage, for your intervention, for every circumstance that led me to this moment. Even the painful ones?" Adrian's voice was gentle. "Especially those," Philippa confirmed. "They taught me my own strength. They made me appreciate what I have now. They brought me to you." Adrian pulled her closer, his embrace warm and secure. "Then I too am grateful for every path that led us both to that ball where I first saw you, to every moment that followed, to everything that made us who we are together." As night fell over Redfield Manor, they remained there, husband and wife, Duke and Duchess, two people who had found in each other not rescue or obligation, but genuine partnership and enduring love. Sometimes, the greatest gifts arrive wrapped in the most unlikely circumstances. Sometimes, dignity lost can be dignity restored. And sometimes, just sometimes, the Duke sees through the rags to the remarkable woman beneath, and both their lives are forever transformed.